Chapter 19. And so Allan stayed on with his friends. The seasons passed, and he slowly grew more skilled in hunting and fishing, and the customs and ways of the tribe. He learned to speak the language well enough so that everyone understood him. Now that he no longer had Nancy to look after, he moved in with the Reek and his wife Lifa and Lifa's mother, Neopik. Also staying with the Reek was Herard, who was the grandfather of Arik and Crickvic. Allan loved Arik and his family. Perhaps because Arik was Allan's age, he did not seem to be as strict and reserved as Uta and Intuk, who were mature hunters well over 30 years of age. None of the members of the tribe kept track of their ages, so Allan did not know how old anyone was. He guessed, though, that Herard was over 70. Herard knew the history of the tribe back for many hundreds of years. Allan liked nothing better, during a long winter storm when everyone was stuck inside their igloos, than to lie on the caribou skins of the sleeping bench and listen to the soothing sing-song voice of Herard. Herard could go on for hours in that same soothing chant. At first Allan only recognized a word here and there, but after living with the Reek for some time he realized that Herard's sing-song chant was the complete history of the tribe. He realized, too, that when Herard died, Arik would be the one to chant the tribe's history so that everyone would remember where they had come from and what adventures had befallen them. And although Arik gave no sign that he was learning the history by heart, he had heard it so often that he knew the legend word by word without even realizing that he had it memorized. There was one phrase in the legend that kept occurring again and again, and that was the sentence, "But we have now lost the knowledge of those things." One day Allan listened more carefully than usual to Herard's chant, especially the parts that were followed by the sentence, "But we have now lost the knowledge of those things." When Herard finally finished the legend, Lifa handed the old man a bowl of caribou soup. Allan watched Herard and carefully examined his features, the full flowing white beard, the round pale blue eyes, the high forehead and cheekbones, the pointed chin. Where the beard trimmed a little, Herard could be a Scottish minister or businessman or judge. And then everything fell into place for Allan. "But you're all descended from the Vikings," Allan cried. Herard smiled. The word Viking meant nothing to him. "The pointed ships that could hold the whole tribe, they were the Viking longships," Allan went on. "The long knives that you don't know how to make anymore, they were Viking broadswords. The island that you started out from was Iceland or Greenland." But Herard, still smiling, shook his head. The words Iceland and Greenland meant nothing to him. Allan realized that all the evidence was in the long song that Herard chanted. The white woolly dogs were sheep. The heavy-horned caribou that gave milk every day were cattle. The big stone igloo was a Viking church, and the land of the igloo roof was glacier-capped Greenland. There was even an explanation of why the Greenland Vikings had disappeared from their two large settlements, as Herard's legend told of bands of hungry polar bears that swept down, winter after winter, and scattered his people. Allan was sure that he was living with a tribe of people who were descended from the Greenland Vikings. And Herard's story solved a lot of other puzzles for Allan. He now understood the early form of Christianity practiced by the tribe. They had not been recently converted at all, but had held on to their Christian beliefs for many centuries. It was only natural that some of those beliefs would have changed over the years, would have become more simple and primitive. And the song also explained why the tribe had very little to do with other Eskimos. They knew they were different from the Eskimos, and the Eskimo tribes they encountered knew it also, so that there was little mixture between the two peoples. In fact, in all the time Allan stayed with them, he only knew of one meeting with Eskimos, and he had not been present at the time. Summer came again and passed, and came once more. Often Allan feared that he would never leave the Arctic. He was becoming so used to the Eskimo way of life. His memories of Aberdeen grew dimmer and dimmer. The strangest thing of all was that he had trouble remembering Nancy's face. Sometimes he would sit for hours, trying to make a picture of that face suddenly appear in his brain. And yet he could recall his mother's face quite easily, or the faces of his sisters, or even the pinched-in, tight-lipped face of Master Duff. But it was Nancy's face he wanted to recall, and when he couldn't, it made him very unhappy and depressed. Sometimes, to keep up his spirits, he imagined what his homecoming would be like. He would walk up Princess Street to McLean's drapery shop. For a moment or two he would stand outside, looking through the window. Then he would spot her, standing behind the counter where the rolls of different cloth were sold. She would be rolling white muslin out from a bolt, measuring 3 feet at a time from the yardstick nailed to the counter. He would watch her for several moments, then walk into the shop and go back to her counter. He would stand for a moment while she swiftly scissored through the muslin and folded the material. Then she would look up to see a tall, blond-bearded man she had never seen before. "May I have a penny's worth of velvet ribbon?" he would ask. She would go to the ribbon shelf and measure him his velvet. Something vaguely familiar about him would bother her, something about his eyes. "And a penny's worth of red satin ribbon," he would say when she laid the velvet in front of him. And now she would be thinking of her first love, that boy who used to spend so much time in the shop buying ribbons as an excuse, her velvet lad who never came home from the sea. And when the satin ribbon was laid in front of him, he would ask for a penny's worth of green silk ribbon. Sometimes it was at this point that she finally recognized him and cried out his name, as though she were seeing a ghost. But sometimes Allan would let the mystery drag out a little more, and his next request would be for yet another penny's worth of ribbon as a present for his sister. At the mention of his sister, Nancy would finally realize who he was. Yes, he knew such daydreaming was silly, but it helped to pass the time and keep up his spirits. And sometimes he would imagine a meeting with Bunty Duff. He would catch the master by the throat and shake him and ask, "How much brains does it take to live all alone on an iceberg for 2 years? How much brains does it take to live with Eskimos and learn their language and their way of life?" In contempt, he would fling the master away from him. "There's more to life than what you'll find in a classroom," would be his final crushing remark. As the years went by, Allan had many strange experiences with the tribe. He went through some hungry periods, when game failed to show up and everyone picked through the gravel on the beaches for seaweed, or scraped moss off the rocks, or went through the heather on their hands and knees looking for berries. Indeed, one early spring, before the fish came back and the walrus returned, when there were no seals to be found, the tribe was forced to kill and eat all but 4 of their dogs. On another occasion, Allan and Arik took a sled and a half a dozen dogs on a simple 3-day trip to pick up some dead seals from a food cache. The trip turned out to be a disaster. Bears or wolverines had discovered the food supply and eaten all the seal meat. There was one blizzard after another. On the return trip, their food ran out, and they were forced to kill the weakest dog for meat. Every other day another dog had to be killed to feed the 2 hunters and the remaining dogs. Finally, the last dog was killed and eaten, while the 2 men were in an igloo, snowbound by yet another storm. They began to take apart the sled, which, except for the 2 wooden runners, was made of walrus and caribou bone. They broke the slats and sled handles into little pieces and made bone soup of them. When the sled had been all broken up and eaten, they started in on the dog's sealskin harness and ate every one of the sealskin lines and traces. They even ate the long dog whip, which was made of plaited walrus hide. When the harness was all eaten, they began to cut small pieces off their clothing and spent hours chewing on the dried caribou skin of their own jackets. When they finally made it back to camp, they were but shadows of their former selves. Everyone else had given them up for dead. And yet a week later they were well and fit, and Arik was eager to go seal hunting once again. But on that one trip they had eaten their 6 dogs, the dog's harness, the sled, their caribou skin blankets, a snow knife made from a caribou shoulder blade, and even some of their own clothing. It was a lesson in survival that Allan never forgot. One late summer, Allan was in camp with the women and children when the returning kayaks of Intuk, Uta, and Krikvik were spotted on the water. The three hunters had gone off on a 2-day trip to see if any caribou could be found. Everyone ran down to meet the returning hunters, and Allan helped carry the kayaks up on the beach. Then he asked Intuk the question he always asked, the answer to which was always no. "Did you see any big ships?" Intuk's face twisted away from Allan, and he began to yell at some children who were dragging a caribou skin blanket on the beach. "Pick that up. Put it away on a pole somewhere. You want the dogs to eat it?" Behind the tents were a couple of platforms on top of poles where the dog harness and extra food were kept so that the dogs could not get at it. Allan looked at Uta and asked, "Were there any big ships?" Uta did not answer and busied himself with something in the kayak. "Krikvik," Allan called. But Krikvik was already marching up the beach in the direction of the camp. Allan was very puzzled by the conduct of the hunters. He had never known any member of the tribe to tell a lie, though they might exaggerate something in telling a funny story. But he had long noticed that rather than tell a lie, they would simply say nothing or refuse to answer a question. Was it possible that they had spotted a whaling ship and did not want to tell him? He was walking towards Arik's tent when half a dozen children suddenly swarmed all around him. "Allan Gordon, Allan Gordon," they chanted. "Take us back up the mountain. Peely has thrown out her bed and needs new heather." They clung to his arms and jacket and led him back up the slope behind the camp. Sometimes the women in the tribe would decide that the pile of heather that was used as a mattress during the summer was too full of bugs. Suddenly a woman would be seen dragging all the heather out of a tent, and within an hour or so all the women would be throwing out their old mattresses. Then the women and Allan and the children, and even old Gerard, would gather armfuls of fresh heather and bring them inside the tents and lay them down on the gravel until the bed part of each tent had a nice, clean, sweet-smelling heather mattress again. High up on the slope above the camp, while the children ran around looking for clumps of the tiny heather, Allan sat down on a large stone and thought about the returning hunters. Could it be possible that they had seen a whale ship and were not going to tell him? If so, he would wait until everyone was asleep and then steal a kayak. He knew roughly in what direction the hunters had gone in their search for caribou. He would try and retrace their route and hope to run across a sailing ship. Just before everyone was ready to come down from the slope with their armfuls of heather, Allan noticed half a dozen hunters come out of Uta's tent. There was Arik and Krikvik and Intuk and Uta and even old Gerard. Something about the way they came out of the tent made Allan think they were having an important meeting. If they had such a meeting without him, then it meant that he was the subject of their conversation. Had it anything to do with the returning hunters? It was all very strange, and he would have to talk to Arik. For one thing, Allan could not understand why no whaling ships had been spotted by the members of the tribe. All during the whaling season, one or more hunters would be out on the sea in their kayaks looking for game. Had something happened to end the whaling voyages? Had the whales disappeared from Arctic waters? Had a great war broken out in Europe, a war among the half-dozen nations that sent out whaling ships? Allan knew that the men of the tribe did not like to talk about the whaling ships. Had something happened to cause this fear? Could it be that some members of the tribe once had dealings with men from a whaling ship, a meeting that had turned out badly for the hunters? So badly that they now avoided all contact with the ships, avoided even the mention of them? Allan hurried down the slope and brought his heather into Peely's tent. The children followed him, and for half an hour he played with the youngsters in the piled-up heather, wrestling with them, pretending that he was a bear and they were hunters, or he was a walrus trying to overturn their kayaks. But finally Peely got annoyed with their play and chased everyone outside. Allan made his way to Arik's tent. He ducked his head and entered the outer, lighter part of the tent where Lifa was sewing some fox fur mittens. Allan smiled at her and went through and into the inner section. Arik lay on the sleeping platform. "So, brother, what does Intuk say about the caribou?" Allan asked. There were no signs of caribou. "And so, they saw nothing strange?" Arik ignored the question. He sat up, took out his short sled knife, and started to carve a small piece of wood. Soon the head of a bear began to take shape. Allan waited. Arik would speak when he was ready. Finally Arik asked, "You still want to go back to your own land?" "Yes." "You do not like it with us?" "I want to see my own people again." "You will not take a wife from among us?" "No. There is a woman at home who is promised to me," Allan said. "Yes." Arik understood that. In the tribe, marriages were sometimes arranged many years in advance, and children as young as 4 or 5 were often promised to each other in marriage by their parents. "They saw large boats," Arik said. "Boats? Sailing ships? How many?" Arik put up one hand and spread his fingers. 5 sailing ships?" Allan repeated. "Part of a whaling fleet on its way home. And even if he missed the 5 ships, surely there would be others. But he had to find out what route the hunters took, where they had spotted the ships." "Some of us did not want to tell you about the ships," Arik said. "You know you are like a brother to me, and our family will miss you. We do not want to see you leave. Others said you might guide us to another ship trapped in the ice. They said that was your spirit gift, as Intuk's gift is hunting, and Uta's is sealing, and Anusklik's is curing sickness. Some said that you would take a woman from the tribe and start a family. As you know, we are short of men, and we have too many women. But you decided to tell me." "Yes. Herard and Intuk said you should leave and go back to your own people. Intuk said that someday soon you would learn how to find the ships by yourself, and then you would bring your own people back to punish us for keeping you here." "No, I would not do that. But Intuk has never liked me." "Intuk is a great hunter," Arik said, "but because of his face he thinks that people do not like him, so he does not like people." Allan thought of the fortune teller. Was Intuk his dark enemy with a scarred face? "How did his face get so scarred?" Allan asked. "It happened one winter when he was a baby, and there were hungry times. His mother lay on the sleeping bench in her igloo. She was so weak from hunger she could hardly move. Intuk was inside the hood of her jacket. A starving dog came into the igloo, dragged Intuk out of the jacket, and began to eat him. His mother spilled hot oil from the lamp on the dog's eyes, but Intuk was already bitten and missing half a cheek." "So that is why Intuk beats the dog so much?" "Yes." "You know, too, that Herard said that the sea spirit would keep the seals away from us if we made you stay." "Then I can leave?" Allan cried out in sudden wonder. "Yes. They are making ready a kayak for you."